Good morning. We're talking about the Galleon trade, but it's not specifically about the ships itself, but because for the past few hours we've been talking about the ship, cargo, and so forth. What I'm going to talk about is two aspects of the Galleon trade, aspects that have been quite forgotten because whenever we talk about the Galleon trade, we always focus on the products, on the trade that happened, the Galleon trade as a business enterprise. No? But two things I will focus on in this talk is one, how the Galleon trade created the city, the walled city of Intramuros. And the second one is not just cargo, was the cargo that was we talk about in bringing goods to the Philippines. We also talk about colonists because the Galleon trade was the only means of the line of communication between Spain, Europe, and Spain and South America, and of course Manila. To introduce the paper, the title of my paper is Building a City, Intramuros, and the Galleon Trade. Way station was the term historians gave to Intramuros when discussing about the Manila of Galleon Trade. The word way station to describe Intramuros is actually a misnomer. When we talk about the way station, we define it as a stopover or a place where a journey is momentarily halted, vehicles are rested, supplies replenished, and cargoes loaded before the trip is continued. Kasi ang original concept na binibigay para sa Intramuros was that it's the stop between the trade between China and Mexico. So it was something in between. This is hardly what happened to Intramuros. A second glance at the workings of the Galleon trade showed that it was more than just a business enterprise. It was the link between the Spanish colony of Manila and what was then known as Nueva España or New Spain in South America and also to Peninsula Spain. In short, the Galleon trade was a lifeline for the center of colonial Spain's might in Asia. So in this lecture, we'll discuss two aspects of Intramuros in relation to the Galleon trade. One, the building of the walls as a defense against external threat. And second, the Galleon as a means of colonization in Manila. It's the first part entitled Protecting the Wealth. Intramuros was practically built by the Galleon trade. The city relied on the ships as the means to transport trade goods from the Philippines to Mexico and vice versa. So, old Manila grew from what was brought in from Mexico and Spain. Okay, so what was brought in? People, colonists arrived by the Galleons, goods, western goods, plants that basically arrived from Mexico. By the way, there's a new archaeological data that has been being studied, but because we have always accepted that the tomato and mango were brought in from Mexico by the Galleon trade. However, archaeological studies being conducted at the present time show that both the tomato and probably the mango may have originally come from the Philippines. It was brought to Mexico for the 5%. Communication was brought in from the Galleon trade because the Galleon trade was the only means of communication between Spain and the Philippines. And of course, news what was happening to Europe was brought in by the Galleon. And most of all, and which is very important, the money that was brought in from the royal treasury. Spanish colonial economy was mercantile oriented with international trade being done for the Galleons. Manila became wealthy because of the Galleon trade. However, it was a risky venture, especially the one that relied heavily on unpredictable natural conditions. So the journey of the Galleon always has to rely on the weather conditions. A lifetime fortune invested in one voyage would be lost in a civil shipwreck on the high seas or captured by pirates. The wealth from the Manila-Acapulco Galleon trade was the reason the Intramuros walls were built. This is the map of a 17th century Intramuros. So this was actually discovered in Mexico. It was found on underneath the lid of a chest that was used in the trade. The increasing popularity of Manila attracted nearby countries as word of mouth among traders entering and leaving the islands traveled fast. The city soon had a long history of foreign attacks, from the Limahong invasion in 1574 until the English and Dutch blockades in the 17th and 18th century. In her article, The Spanish Fortifications of Manila, Ireland gold at this time, around 1575, Manila was constantly open to attack, not only by Chinese and Japanese pirates, but by Portuguese forces, jealous of Spanish success as a rival Oriental trade, and by English freebooters already beginning to prey upon Portuguese and Spanish merchant ships. As the Spanish colony grew economically, so did the need for fortifications built along the lines of a European medieval defense system. From the start of its construction in the 16th century, the Intramuros walls were built and redesigned according to the needs of the capital. Here are some of the plans for the fortifications of Intramuros. And you see here the earliest map that would be bodied of the walls of Intramuros. The design of the on their right is one of the gates, while the design of the fortification, the one on the bottom right, is the plans for the building of the fortification of Baluarte and San Diego. The building of the walls required money. So, aside from the taxes and fines levied on the Chinese, the walls were built with money from the royal treasury. The funds for the building of the walls were replenished annually by the Mexican Situado, or this was the subsidy that resulted in the Galleon trade. The royal decree of February 19, 1606, ordered that customs and freight duties on Philippine products to Mexico was to be returned to the Philippines to be made up by the Royal Treasury of Mexico. Here's the part of the content of the Royal Decree done by King Philip II, which shows that the money from the Galleon trade of products from the Philippines, once it was purchased in Mexico, the money is supposed to go back to the colony. Depending on the subsidy amount, an annual colonial budget earmarked 50,000 pesos to 500,000 pesos for the construction of vessels, which is the galleons, and fortifications, which are the walls, not only the ones in Intramuros, but also fortifications around the Philippines. This kind of financing continued to the latter part of the 17th century until the early 19th century, when the Galleon trade ended and the Philippines started to become a self-sufficient colonial economy. Unfortunately, the walls and fortifications didn't mean assured protection for the city. For example, in an effort to capture the ships, the Dutch and English fleets simply blockaded Manila Bay to prevent the entry of the galleons. So here was the problem whenever the port of Manila was used by the galleons. The Dutch and English ships simply has to block off Manila Bay, and that's it. The galleons can no longer enter the Philippines. They ended up somewhere being captured. What was usually done now by the Spanish was, instead of landing in Manila, they would go via the north. Sometimes landing in the port of Galleon, then unload the cargo there, then transport it overland to Manila. But that was the way it happened during the Dutch blockade. Now, here's one of the reports given by the Galleon historian, William Schurz, in his modern study. As you can see here, the period of 1621 was a dark time for Manila because this was the time that the Dutch and English were blockading the movement of ships going from Manila. In fact, if you're familiar with the monastery of Santa Clara, the Santa Clara nuns in Manila, they arrived in the Philippines in 1621, but unfortunately they could not land in Manila. So they had to disembark some of the ports that are north of Manila, and they had to be transported overland to the city. Another incident in 1735 shows how ineffective the walls were. Now, this was during the time of Fernando Valdez de Cabo, where it was the Spanish who made the offensive, but apparently the Dutch retaliated, and the Spaniards ended up losing points in this adventure. And again, the insufficient protection provided by the walls that no matter how much money was invested for the fortifications of the Intramuros, it was basically proved effective against a land attack, but it did not protect anything the city from the sea. The disaster of the British invasion in 1762 and the occupation of Manila in 1764 showed the vulnerability of the Spanish Empire. Still, expenses were budgeted for the repair of the walls and fortifications after the return of the city of Manila in 1764. By that time, the Galleon trade ended in 1815. Little was done to the walls except minor repairs and renovations. Now, I'm going to the next topic, which is the transportation of people. The Galleons brought the Spanish colonies to the Philippines. Father Luis Merino, in his study of the Spanish population in early colonial Manila, mentions this. The Galleon trade was in principle another royal grant intended specifically to increase the population of the Philippines by offering prospective settlers additional economic incentives. Merino here was talking about the Spanish colonies, who had to be brought to the Philippines. Much had been said about the adverse effect of the Galleon trade in the Philippines. Merino's study showed that the migration to the Philippines was not of settlers, but capital, which was caused by the greediness of businessmen in Mexico who took advantage of the growing trade with China. Spanish colonial life in Manila began with the start of the Galleon trade. Colonists were passengers of the ship. Governance was shipped in to royal decrees and letters by high officials from the Governor General to military officers. Christianity also came to the Philippines via the Galleon trade. The missionaries from the different religious orders brought their passage in the galleons to bring them to the islands for their evangelization mission. The initial population of 250 Spanish citizen soldiers, so that this was the beginning, this is the nucleus of the early population in Manila, came from the men of the Legazpi expedition that arrived in Manila in 1571. The new settlement was described as a strong, lively city, larger than any other Spanish settlement in all the Indies. In this study, Merino mentioned the arrival of colonists on board the returning ships Santiago and San Juan, 5 days after the official foundation, and in late 1572, the Galleon Espiritu Santo arrived with a contingent of reinforcements for the colony. These arrivals came at a time when there was no fixed number of galleons or the tonnage, the cargo, to sail annually. Evidence of the growth and decline of the Intramuros population later proved that these were not directly related to the arrival and departure of the galleons. Still, it was mentioned to the king by the Governor General and officials that they brought with them Spaniards to these islands at a time when problem of population reduction was encountered. In short, the stability of having Spaniards in the Philippines also had its ups and downs. Conditions were so poor at that time that the new arrivals were not enough to offset the casualties of war, diseases, and even the colonies who want to leave the Philippines. There was a time when the government official commented on the colonization situation in the islands. This is what he said. The recommendation of President Rojas, one of the high government officials in the Philippines, writing to Philip II, recommended that no person should leave the Philippines because they were swiftly losing a lot of colonies here in the country. The main causes of the population decline in the young colony were: one, the absence of economic incentives that slowed the migration. Second, the very low rate of reproduction in the families settled in the Philippines. At the time, there was more men than women. And in fact, there was a problem even with the arrival of women, because when women arrived in the Philippines, they immediately want to become nuns in the Philippines. So there was a large paper of the men, especially when the monastery of Santa Clara arrived in the Philippines. All of a sudden, all the women wanted to become nuns. Of course, the men were desperate enough to ask again for colonies to bring to the Philippines. And of course, the third factor was a very high mortality rate. The tropical islands wasn't exactly healthy. There were a healthy place in some places. Still, the colonies held on. By the early 17th century, there were more married Spaniards than single men or widowers. Combined with each wave of migration, the Galleon arrivals, it wasn't long before the population of the colony stabilized. Dr. Herola talked about the conditions of the life on board with the Magellan expedition. For my part, here is how a colonist would experience the travel from Spain to the Philippines. It is a test of the human will for colonists who took a chance for a new life in the Philippines because of the hardships they had to go through on the long hard journey from Spain to the Philippines and vice versa. The journey to the Philippines from Spain begins at Seville, where permission is granted by the President of Cartagena, which is the business enterprise, to travel to the Indies. From there, the passenger has to travel overland from Seville to San Lucas de Barberena or to Cadiz before setting sail from Spain to South America. That's only the first part of the journey. Okay. The would-be colonists then arrive at Veracruz, which is on the western side, right? It's on the western side. Then they have to go to Mexico by traveling overland to reach the port of Acapulco, which means they have to cross the entire South American continent to get to the other side. When I spoke almost a decade ago to the Cuban ambassador, he kept asking a group of researchers, including me, to please include the research the involvement of Cuba, especially Havana, in the Galleon trade, because Havana was part of that trade that had to cross before crossing the South American continent to reach the port of Acapulco. Arrangements for the overland trip to the port were carefully made because these were travelers, and they wanted the travelers to be as comfortable as possible. If you have to remember, these travelers were not VIPs because they were colonists who are going to colonize a distant place. So they were made as comfortable as possible to the rough roads and mountain passes to the other side of the continent. The trail, that is the map of the trail. They call it the China Road. Named after, of course, the Galleon, of course, known as now the China, the Chinese ships. So it practically crossed through the mountains of South America to the other side. Here is a description of how it was done. Travel on the road over the China Road was mostly by mule-back, because it's where the hardy animals could cross the mountains. And little was done to make it usable for wheel traffic until the last years of the Galleon trade. Conditions of travel were very primitive, accommodations were few, and discomforts manifold. So here is an illustration of one of the trips. The trail was estimated to be more than 330 miles of rugged terrain and primitive villages. Inns were spaced 9 to 12 miles apart. Reaching one, however, was more of a nightmare than really. It's practically an inn that was just put together to accommodate travelers. Native innkeepers, which were usually South Americans, knew little of the art of tavern keeping. The food was inedible, the accommodations were poor, the beds were hard, the sheets used for the beds were infested with insects, and the lighting, which was made coming from oil lamps, were usually not suitable to light the entire room. Travelers fought on the trail at nightfall. They would had to sleep on the trail, had to make do with sleeping under the stars, becoming easy prey to animals or worse, thieves. This is just part of one of the colony. And already, the colonists were experiencing hardships. Now comes part 2. Upon reaching the port of Acapulco, rest was provided in inns while arrangements were made for the travel to the Philippines. Agustinian Friar Juan Martinez de Zuniga said that the commander of the Galleon is usually paid 1,000 pesos in going to and 500 pesos coming from Acapulco. After recuperating from the arduous overland journey, the colonists now must steel themselves for the part 2 of the trip, which is sailing to the Philippines. The voyage lasted from 3 to 6 months, with frequent rough waters and bad weather, depending on the part of the year when the journey began. It was no luxury to sail on the Galleon, even for the hardiest man. Kung sailors, Magellan sailors, have a difficult time crossing the Atlantic and the Pacific, what more for ordinary people who were simply civilians living a life in Spain, coming to the Philippines, and are not basically trained for ocean sailing. Cramped quarters, bad food, and tainted water were only a few of the hardships encountered on the trip. Disease, mostly scurvy, the common seaman's disease before the discovery of ascorbic acid, and very decimated both passengers and crew during the latter part of the voyage. It was said that the voyage from Acapulco to Manila was easier at least 3 months than the return trip. Still, if misfortune befell the returning Galleon, the hardships remained the same with insurmountable casualties. Here is what William Schurz mentioned in his study of the sailing of the Galleon. If undertaken in proper season, the westward voyage of the Galleon was as safe and easy as that in the other direction was very sudden and dangerous. Whatever misfortunes befell ships in this passage were due to late departure or to the blunders of incompetent ship captains or pilots. A ship leaving Acapulco too late was liable to run into bad weather from the Torres onward to the Philippines. Under such conditions, she was delayed in reaching the Philippines and delaying epidemics breaking out on board in the latter stage. The casualties actually in the Galleon, the sailing of the Galleon, so the transportation of the colonies were very high. The Espiritu Santo lost 40 passengers during a military trip in 1606. The San Luis, another Galleon, lost 8 colonists. On his worst voyage to the Philippines, the voyage that brought the first Dominicans here in the Philippines, the initial voyage also included Domingo de Salazar. Along with some Dominicans who were supposed to start the first Dominican mission. By the time the voyage ended, only Salazar and other Dominicans were the only ones who survived. The rest of the Dominicans either abandoned the mission in Mexico, while the rest died on the journey to the Philippines. This is why the actual beginning of the Dominican mission had to be moved, I think, a year or two, because they had to wait for the second batch of Dominicans to reach the Philippines. Accidents were also common, and Galleon shipwrecks did not just mean the loss of precious trade cargo, it also meant the loss of lives. So as I mentioned by Dr. Viviana, this is the Galleon trade from the process from the Spain, the Atlantic, and the Pacific side. The Galleon trade was more than a business undertaking for the Spanish Empire. The ships were also a means of communication for the islands and a way to develop the colonization of the Philippines. Through its 250 years of existence, the Galleon trade was a successful venture in relation to the port of Intramuros as the capital of the Spanish Empire, and of course as the colonial center of Spain in the east. This is actually part of my conclusion, and I prefer it more lengthy discussions with my fellow panelists. Thank you very much.